So today I'm going to show you how to paint these lovely snapdragons with a really loose watercolor effect. I'm going to place these here as sort of an inspiration. I'm going to place those right there so you can see sort of the anatomy of the flower. And I'm going to start with some opera pink and rose madder, and I'm also going to add a touch of my white gouache. Now, you don't have to use white gouache, you can dilute your paint. Sometimes I like to use white gouache. It's more opaque, it'll add opacity to your watercolor paint, so if you don't want that, don't use it. Sometimes I use a very light pastel color palette, and I find it helpful in creating these pastel-like colors. So I've got a pretty watery mixture going on. And looking at these petals, you can tell they're not like a sunflower or a daisy where you've got petals that are uniform, radiating out of a central circle. These are tubular flowers. Just looking at the overall impression, this grouping, you've got fluttery petals, different directions, sort of a tubular shape that meets a central stem. And then as we move up the stem, we've got smaller leaves, so notice that. And we've got tiny buds, smaller buds, and a nice spring green color. And as we move down the stem, we've got more of a bluer green color. So just all those little things I'm going to keep in mind as I approach this flower. And so I got my pink mixed up here, and I'm just going to put in a fluttery petal. Using the tip of my brush, I'm just trying to capture that looseness of the petals. And then I've got sort of another petal at the bottom, and they connect into a tube, but I'm leaving some white space here just to give definition. While it is wet, what I like to do is dab in a bit of more intense color. That pink is way too bright, way too bright. I also like to remove color, so how I do that is I take a thirsty brush, dab it on my paper towel. Now it acts like a sponge, and I can just soak up some color, and it leaves a little white highlight. Another thing you can do while it's wet, you can take your pink, like rose madder is more of a subdued pink, and I can just pop it in the center, or maybe in some of the petals, and just let the color sort of blend. All right, now I'm going to add another one over here, and so I'm gonna again mix up a fairly light pink, and let's pop one up here. So I'm gonna create a little petal here. Might have them touch a little bit. Keep in mind that when your paint is wet, if you touch another area that's wet, the colors will bleed together. And I do this on purpose sometimes because I do like that atmospheric look. But I do make sure I leave white space, little gaps, so that I can create some more definition in my petals. All right, so while that is wet, I'm going to, let's drop in a bit of yellow mixed with our pink, because I am seeing some yellow. I can pop some over here too. Now this effect works while everything is still wet. It won't work when it's dry. So let's add a bit of that pink down in here. Intensify this area too while it's still wet. And then I'm going to paint this little tube shape here, just by creating a little. Notice how I didn't attach it to the petal, because then the colors would bleed. Although I can do that if you want. And then now let's add a third one up here just to balance everything out. So I'm going to look at this one, grab some of my pink, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. As you move toward the top, your buds are going to get smaller and your leaves will get smaller. And let's pop in a bit of pink over here. And you can remove some of that color if you want to create a bit of a highlight. I rinse my brush, dab, dab, dab. Now it becomes a sponge and I can soak up anything. Okay, so now that it's at this stage, I'm going to add some leaves and some greenery. So you can use, let's see, here's a number 8. I've got some sap green mixed with cobalt blue, and add some more of that green, even a bit of yellow. And I'm going to start over here and just make a few little leaf shapes. I want it more of a spring green at the top, so I'm going to add some more yellow, create little buds. They can even go off the page, that's okay. But really you're just creating short little leaf shapes using the tip of your brush, and you can use a smaller brush for this part. A number 8 would work good for the lower leaves, but try a smaller brush. You'll get more fine lines. I'm using a number 6. And make your leaves go in different directions. So we've got a central stem. See how that green mixed with the pink? That's okay. If you like that, I personally really like the looseness of this style of painting, so just know that where your paint is wet, your colors will bleed. So if you don't want that, you can wait till it dries or just avoid the area. I'm going to have this curve a little bit, maybe like that. See how my leaves are different shapes? I'll put another stalk over here. So this number 6 works pretty good for this size of leaf shapes. And I've got some thin leaves, got some going in different directions. Let's pull it all the way down because I want to create a like a little meadow going on here. So there, we can pause there and we can add another layer once this dries. We can add some more flowers over here. We could do different kinds. We could do more of a daisy shape, or we could do another snapdragon. I think I'm going to do some yellow snapdragons, so I'm going to take, let's see, maybe I'll make them sort of yellow peach color. So I'm mixing my yellow with just a hint of my alizarin crimson. And I'm going to just pop in a few little flowery shapes. It looks sort of orange, that's okay. Snapdragons come in all sorts of fun colors. These are just very loose, loose shapes. And I'm gonna pop one over here. They're larger flowers near the bottom, and as you move up, they become a little bit smaller. I'm moving up that stem, and I'm going to put a few little bud-shaped flowers up here. I'll have this one be a shorter flower next to this one. While my paint is still wet, I'm I'm going to go ahead and pop in a bit of that. I do like that it's leaning orange, so I'm going to pop in a bit of that darker color. Just poke it in while it's wet. Then you'll get that nice sort of transition. Rinse your brush. Now let's add some greenery. So I'm using that mix of spring green, and this time I'll start at the tip, and I'm gonna paint some little buds like this. See how they're very tiny? They're just in these nice little clusters. Just do 3 right there with some tiny fine leaves sticking out. And then I'm gonna put in connecting leaf here to that yellow bud. Add one here to this yellow guy. Bring that stem down. Leave some space. See how I do these little short brush strokes? So I'm careful not to touch in too much of my wet area. But some of it I do want to create that atmospheric look. So see, this is, I like this with the green merging with the yellow. I think that's a nice effect. So let's pull that down. I had some students ask about using cerulean because their color palettes, they have one of those travel palettes that doesn't have cobalt blue, it has cerulean, and it's a nice blue. I tend to work or make my colors more subdued, but you can work with it. I like to add yellow to it to make some nice vibrant greens. I think I'm going to let this whole thing dry before I add more layers to my Snapdragons. But that's a really loose demonstration of some snaps. So once that dries, we can add some detail. But we can add some more green. Deepen that green a little bit. So I've got a deeper mixture going on. And I'm just going to make some little lines. I like to deepen it where that central stem is. Sometimes I'll just go over completely and create a new leaf. Other times I'll just enhance what's there. You can create leaf shapes by just pushing your brush down like that. You can also create fine lines by just taking the tip. And notice how I use my arm rather than my hand. My arm is more steady. Sometimes I use my hand when I'm going up, but I do like to use my arm for movement because I think it gives a nice fluid brush stroke. So we can do the same with the greenery over here. It's pretty dry, so this second layer, usually we'd wait longer, but I'm just doing this for demonstration. You can go ahead and take your deeper mixture, your darker value, and add a few more leaves. You can deepen the green you already have. But watercolor is all about that contrast between light values and dark values. And you can achieve that by layering, intensifying your colors. All right. Now, if this part's dry, we can start adding some deeper tones into our flowers. So I'm going to start defining some of these flowers. So I'm rinsing my brush and I'm going to make a a mix of my pink and a little bit of my white gouache. Again, that opacity is something I like to use when I'm painting this shade of pink, but it's not a requirement, so it's up to you. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to the mixture. And then what I'm going to do next is just define some of these petals. So I'm looking at this part here, and I'm noticing that this part opens up, but I'm going to paint it as it is, closed like that. So I'm going to add a little bit of a darker area right here, just define it a little bit. And then I'm going to rinse my brush, dab it off on a paper towel. While this edge is wet, I'm going to pull it down, grab some more paint, and then just define a little bit of this area here, just at the bottom. Just give it that sort of a ruffled look. Maybe a line right there. And let's grab some more paint, and we'll do a little bit of definition up here too. Just some of those little edges of the petals can be a bit more defined. I'm going to rinse my brush because I want a little bit more of a dilute mixture, and I'm just going to do one little bit of a color there. I'm going to leave that and let me think about that before I add anything else. For this next one over here, I'm looking at one of these facing this way, and I'm seeing that maybe I can darken up the edge, the top edge of this petal here. And then again in the center, I can come down, give a bit more definition to that side, and maybe a little bit right up here. I'm going to rinse my brush, dab it, and then soften that. It was a little too harsh for me. I'm going to leave that, leave it as is. Let's move on to this one. And it's facing this way. So I'm going to take my brush. Let's darken up this side part right here. Just add another layer. This is layering, so you can still see the layer below. We're just deepening it, giving a bit more definition. And while everything's still wet, I'm going to deepen it some more. Add some more of that rose madder. I'm going to poke it in right here because I like what's going on. I like how that's got some nice depth. And I also like this part here, a little bit more depth. And call that good. And we'll get started over here next. So right here I'm just taking a bit more of a deeper mix of my orange color, and I'm just going to define some of the edges of this petal. And I'm not going to get too fussy with it, and I don't want to cover the first layer completely, just giving enough definition to suggest the shape of the flower. And we'll do the same thing to the flower up here. And just a few little bits on these buds. A little bit of shading on the side makes them look more three-dimensional. And then again at some of the edges of the flower petals. And one of the things to keep in mind is to not overwork your watercolor paintings. Try and work with your watercolor. It can be a frustrating medium if you try and make it work a certain way, but it does have a mind of its own, and so I always try and work with it rather than fighting it. So I'll often make decisions after the first layer dries, and then it might affect how I proceed in the next couple of layers. I hope you've enjoyed my tutorial, and as always, I would love to see your paintings too, so please share them with me on social media or wherever you like.